Preamble to Declaration. 230 years ago, a group of humans was determined to establish a sovereign nation and institute their own laws, based on their personal wants and needs. Without regard for the native inhabitants, they immigrated to a new land, over in it, and called it their own. Secure in their newly found territory, they made a declaration of independence from the government powers and laws that controlled their lives. In so doing, they established the most powerful and comprehensive human society ever known upon this earth. Its economic structure and purpose drastically changed the course of human events, creating a world that revolves around its own perpetuation. This nascent nation's powerful presence affects the present course and future of all humanity. If it fails, the world will crumble around it. Consequently, only the people who perpetuate it and give it its power and authority can keep it from failing. Accepting this fact, and that this nation is increasingly failing to bring the peace and happiness once promised, the people of this earth are uniting together to reinforce its foundation before its walls crumble to the earth on which it sits. By using this nation's first declaration of independence and changing a few words to reflect the current needs of its people, we present the solid foundation of a worldwide effort to eliminate what could potentially be the demise of the human race. Any alterations made to the original Declaration of Independence are marked by italic denotation. The Humanity Party's Declaration of Reform and Change. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for all people to dissolve the political bands which have isolated and separated them from each other, and to assume among the powers of the earth the united and equal station to which the laws of nature, or of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of humankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to unite. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all humans are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among us, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter, or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their natural existence and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that humankind is more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable than to right itself, by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under poverty and inequality, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new public servants for their future security and existence. Such has been the patient sufferance of the majority of the human race, and such is now the necessity, which constrains them to alter their present systems of government by the same laws by which these governments were established, the vote of democracy, the voice of the people. The history of the present world governments and their agendas is a history of repeated injuries and inequalities, all having in direct object the establishment of governing entities that exist to perpetuate themselves without serving the needs of the people who have established them. They, our governments, have refused to establish laws which are the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. They have forbidden their governing bodies to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance to the sustaining of human life, unless suspended in their operation till their campaign of wars have been waged, and when so suspended, they have utterly neglected to attend to them. They have refused to pass other laws for the sustenance and welfare of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them, and formidable to tyrants only. They have called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with their measures. They have outlawed, harassed, and intimidated groups of people thus formed to supplicate them for peace and the basic necessities of life repeatedly, for opposing with firmness their invasions on the rights of the people. Systematically abolishing term limitations on their members, they have refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, they remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of corporate manipulation from without, and corruption within. They have endeavored to prevent the population of an equal world, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of all foreigners, by transcending the imaginary borders which they have established to protect them without regarding the ramifications of abuse said borders have on human rights and decency, refusing to pass others, to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of basic human citizenry in a world meant for all. They have obstructed the administration of justice, by refusing their assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers that protect all people equally, regardless of economic status. They have made judges dependent on their will alone for the tenure of their offices, and the amount and payment of their salaries. They have erected a multitude of new offices, and sent hither swarms of officers, to harass our people in protection of corporate rights, while denying personal freedoms. They have kept among us, in times of peace, government bureaucracies without the consent of our legislatures, whose full determination is to support government-imposed policy in spite of what such policies do to the rights of the people and their desire to live without stress and worry of having the basic necessities of life. They have affected to render the military independent of, and superior to the civil power, held by the voice of the people. They have combined with others, to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our constitution, which should always constitute a guarantee to us all of life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving their assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For sending large bodies of armed troops among us at the will of their selfish agendas, pretending to be protecting the people from the people. For protecting themselves from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of this world through their negligence, in assuring the guarantees set herein by the voice of the people. For controlling our trade with all parts of the world, assuring that those with whom they have formed secret combinations benefit from this trade, while billions of us suffer from their trade laws and mandates. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. For depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, suffering those so impoverished to accept plea in abeyance or plea and waiver or rights agreements, negating the very rights for which we, the people, established the system to judge ourselves. For transporting many of us beyond seas, to be tried for pretended offenses, such as, but not limited to, illegal immigration, passport violation, and document forgery which we are forced to commit, in order to sustain our own lives and the lives of our children. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, which, instead of protecting the rights of all people to those basic human necessities that allow life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, establish those forms which benefit the wealthy minority from whom they derive their powers. For suspending our own legislatures, and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. They have abdicated government throughout the world, by declaring the people out of their protection, and waging war against us. They have plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. They are at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries, which they call soldiers and heroes, to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, scattered throughout the world with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of any civilized nation. They have constrained our fellow citizens to take up arms against us, forcing our hand in defense and offense to protect the rights they have taken from us to bear arms against each other, to become the executioners of our friends and brethren, or to fall ourselves by their hands. They have excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and have endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our world the merciless travesty which they perpetrated against the native peoples of our earth, calling them, for example, Indian savages, who once were a peaceful people, taking only from our earth what was needed to sustain their lives, thereby forced into submission to these merciless powers for their very survival. The government's known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A government, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a humane people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our fellow humans and our leaders. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislatures to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us, forcing us to war with each other, and causing further human carnage without our majority consent. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our involuntary emergence, birth, into the human societies of this world. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred. To disavow these proclamations made herein would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence, and lead to further degradation of our natural species. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity, by which all humans are tied together equally. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity, to those whom denounce our declarations and intentions, and hold them, as we hold the rest of humankind, enemies of peace and decency. We, therefore, the people of the Humanity Party, by strength of our united voice, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world in the consciences of all its people for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name, and by authority of the majority of the good people of planet Earth, solemnly publish and declare, that every human thus given the respect and honor of being born into our world, and so named equally by those here now, will be provided and guaranteed free food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, both physical and mental, and education, from the day of our birth to the day of our mortal death, and that as a united voice of the majority, we have full power to demand these things from those who govern us, commanding them to establish international law to protect and enforce our will. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence and our united resolve, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes and our sacred honor, herein submitting our names to this cause.